원인, 안식권, 안착.
Lisa Kohn, thanks so much for coming on to Talk Beliefs from your home in Pennsylvania. Now, you own a leadership consulting and executive coaching firm and are also an author, having penned a memoir of your life growing up in the Unification Church, a group also known as the Moonies. We'll be talking about your book, To the Moon and Back, and of course, the Unification Church and what its adherents believe. But before that, let's just hear about your childhood. Much of your early life was split between New Jersey and the East Village of New York. Isn't that right?
Yes, so my parents got married very young because they had to. They had my brother at 19 and me at 20. And then they split up soon after that. And we lived with my mom in New Jersey, outside of New York City. And my dad was either wandering the world in various places or living in the East Village of New York City. And so when we go into New York City, that's where we would go to see him. But it was split between those two worlds even then.
Well, you grew up in the 1970s and your parents were both very young and very much influenced by the hippie movement of the 1960s. But then things started to change when your mom discovered a certain religion.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. So we were living with my mom in East Orange, New Jersey. And then the summer between my second and third grade in school, I'm 7 or 8 years old, we were going to drive. She bought a van for my dad, Danny, and we were going to drive across country to California to go move on to a convent. But what happened was my grandmother got diagnosed with cancer. So instead of going to California, we just went across state New Jersey and moved in with my grandparents. And we lived there. My grandmother passed away from cancer, and my mom stayed taking care of my grandfather and running the house for him. And then in 1974, January of 1974, my mom's friend, with whom she used to hitchhike across the country every summer to go out to the commune, called my mom and said, "You have to go hear Reverend Sun Myung Moon speak." And my mom went to hear Moon speak in January 1974 in Princeton, New Jersey, and came home a changed person. She came home excited. This is amazing. He has a message. Jesus wasn't supposed to die. This is incredible. And nothing much happened for a couple of months. And then in the beginning of the summer of 1974, other members in the church convinced my mom to go to Barrytown, New York, where they had a huge building that used to be a seminary where they indoctrinated people. And my mom went up for the weekend and came back, and went up for a week and came back, and went up for another week and came back, and basically spent most of the next months at Barrytown, New York, learning the doctrine. And then one weekend, she put my older brother Robbie, and I in the van, and we drove up to Barrytown, and we pull up and park the van, and we get out, and we go into this huge gymnasium, and all the sisters, all the women are sitting on the floor on one side of the room, and all the brothers, all the men are sitting on the floor on the other side of the room. And within moments, Reverend Moon walks in with his interpreter and starts speaking, and that was it. We were Moonies.
Well, before we get into how your family dynamics change because of that choice your mother made, let's just focus on the Unification Church itself. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, what are the origins of the Unification Church? Who are the leaders? And what are their main beliefs?
The Unification Church was founded by Reverend Sun Myung Moon according to the divine principle, Reverend Moon's teachings. Moon, when he was 15, was praying in the hills of Korea, and Jesus appeared to him and said, "I was not able to finish my mission on earth. Please come, step up, finish my mission for God." And that was the beginnings of the Unification Church. I will just kind of hint to the fact that many years later, there's a lot of talking now, but other less true religious ways that it was founded. But that's the story that we heard when we joined. And I always describe it as a mixture between Judeo-Christian thought and Eastern philosophy. So there's a lot of duality based on Eastern religions, but it is truly, it sees the Old Testament as there, and then Jesus brought the New Testament, and Reverend Moon has brought the completed Testament. Truly the belief is that Adam and Eve, God created Adam and Eve to be fruitful, to grow up and mature and multiply and have dominion over the earth. But they had sex before they were supposed to. The fall of man in the Unification Church is premarital sex. Lucifer seduced Eve, and Eve seduced Adam. And so from that, man is cast out of the Garden of Eden, and everyone is born with original sin, and God keeps trying to bring people back, and people don't go back to God. And then Jesus came, and Jesus was not supposed to die. Jesus was supposed to, again, find a wife and marry and bring the kingdom of heaven on earth as well as the kingdom of heaven on heaven. But obviously that did not happen. And so Jesus needed to come again, and Jesus came again in Reverend Moon to again marry and bring, have children without original sin and start a world without original sin that is a world for God.
And did he write anything, any sort of scriptures or this other testament?
It's called The Divine Principle, and it's a big book and it just,
So it is a book, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That goes through all the teachings. And as I say to people, when I research the teachings, this is how a cult works, and I'm jumping ahead, but we'll go back. When I research the teachings to put it into my memoir so that I could get them right and remember them, they still made absolute sense to me. Like, I know they're not true, but my brain went, oh yeah, that's right. That's what it is, because you're very indoctrinated with the teachings that he came up with.
Well, your mother and father were two very different people, and your life back then consisted of spending weekdays with your father and weekends with your mother. Now, these were two pretty conflicting worlds you bounced between. Were you able to reconcile them at all in your young mind?
So, yes and no. So what happened, we go to the Barrytown, we see Moon speak, we become members, I'm best friends with his kids. We were very involved, but my mom lived with my brother and I and our grandfather outside of New York City. And then over the months that followed, my mom used to go into New York City more and more often and go in all day long and come back on the late train and just spent so much time, almost all her time, at the church center in New York City. And then in probably January of 1975, she sat us down and she said, I feel very pulled. What should I do? And we said, leave. You should leave us. Go serve God and leave us. So she did. She moved into New York City to actually run part of the church, which was for people who had kids and couldn't move into the church full time. And ironically, my mom spent much of her time in the church taking care of other people's children, which is a whole nother story. But so she moves in, and I'm about 12 years old, and it's myself, my older brother, and my grandfather, and I'm running the house, I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, I'm doing everything. Because my grandfather, when my grandmother died, he got depressed. He was a judge and a lawyer here in the States, and so he got depressed, and then my mom left and he got more depressed, and then he stopped practicing his cases, so then he got disbarred and he got more depressed, and the police were doing a circle of the block on a suicide watch for him, and it was obviously didn't know anything was going on. This was going on, and then finally he was supposed to go to court and maybe to jail, and his doctor put him in the psychiatric ward of the hospital instead. And at that point, somebody told my dad, Danny, who we had known not to tell that my mother had left. Someone told him that we were alone. We had nowhere. They shuffled us around for a while until Danny found out, and he came and got us, and he brought us to live with him in New York City in the East Village. And from then on, yes, like you said, every weekend, every holiday, all my heart, all my life was in the church with my mom, or if my mom wasn't around, just at a church center. But the weekdays we lived with Danny, and Danny's life was a life of, I call it.
We are talking about your biological dad, who's happy to call him Danny.
Yes. So my father to this day does not like to be called anything but his name. He's like, I'm a person. I'm not a label. Call me Danny. If you call me dad, I'll call you Dodd. If you call me father, I'll call you daughter. So yes, Danny is my dad.
Very hippie.
Yeah, hippie.
All the way.
All the way. And so we move in with him, and life with him is, as I said, I describe it as sex, drugs, and squalor. And I once said that to my friends from school. I said, maybe it's not squalor. They're like, no, it was. But it was a lot of drugs and a lot of craziness and a lot of instability. He was a hippie in the 70s in downtown New York City. And And so it was like, how did I handle it? So he was Satan. In my mind, he was Satan and it was satanic. And I either wanted to convert him or I just kind of went like this, like I hunkered down and hid when I was there from all the craziness going on so that I could just get back to the church. And people in the church didn't know about my life with Danny because I was embarrassed about it, so I didn't share it. So it was really two very different, both a little crazy, conflicting worlds that I went back and forth between. My brother and I went back and forth between.
It must have been very confusing, especially I think you said that Robbie was introduced by your dad to marijuana, I think at 10 years old or something, your brother?
Right before the church, yes. My dad's friend thought it'd be really cool if Robbie was smoking pot. And so Danny was like, oh, that's a good idea. And so I had him smoking at the age of 10. And once my brother actually outsmoked my dad and all his friends because it was so much fun. So it only in looking back do I realize how hard it must have been to go back and forth, because the thing about kids, as we all know, is you know what you know and you don't know anything different. So it just was my life. But I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be with my mom. I wanted to be in the church. I did not want to be with my dad. And I was terrified of his life. So yeah, it was a tough going back and forth.
Well, you knew Reverend Moon's children and were even good friends with his second oldest daughter, Injun. What were the Moon children like, and how do you regard those friendships now, looking back at it all?
So on one hand, they were just kids, right? And when I met them, there weren't any other kids in the church in America, so we were close to them. I became very good friends with them. And they were just kids who wanted to be kids. But on the other hand, their lives were extremely difficult because they were revered, absolutely revered. They're children of the Messiah. They're true children. They're as glorious as they can be. So they're revered by all the members, which means they could get away with everything and anything. We threw stones at people. Like there was no rules when it came to the true children. And then at the same time, they were watched. Everything they did, it was like being, in that fishbowl. Everything they did was watched and judged. To this day, everything they did do is watched and judged. And when I reconnected with Injun, which is a long story, but when I reconnected with her some years ago, she said to me that she once went to pick up her kids at the airport, her parents at the airport, and they had to show her a picture of her parents so she would remember what they looked like. So so on one hand, they were just kids, but then they had no rules, but they had a lot of rules, and they were revered. It was a very tough spot, and they had security guards all the time to stay with them, and the guards used to say to me, Lisa, keep them under control. And I used to say, are you kidding me? Like, how can I keep them under control? Like, they're the true children. You do whatever they want. You go wherever they want. I have another friend who grew up in the church and left, who's also friends with them, and has gone back to see Injun at one point, and she said to me, I still bowed to her. Like, we bowed to them because we revered them, and we also just played with them because we were friends. So it was a very, I'm not worthy to be your friend. I'm lucky to be your friend, and I'm not worthy to be your friend. It's a really weird dynamic.
Yeah, and it must really play havoc with those children's psychology if people are bowing to you when you're told you have no original sin. It
is. I mean, to this day, many of them are dead. Some OD'd, some have left, there's a lot of different things going on. They're pretty, in my humble opinion, pretty messed up because how they were raised was pretty messed up.
Well, life as part of the Unification Church was anything but perfect, but you were generally content. But things started to change after you went away to music camp. Can you tell us about that?
I wouldn't say it was perfect, right? Because it is a cult and a lot of crazy, harmful things happened. But as I always say to people when I explain my life, when we found the church, it truly was a haven from my childhood and the craziness with my mom before the church. And then it felt like stability and rules compared to my dad. So it was everything to me, even though it is a cult and it did mess things up. But so before music camp, every summer, every vacation, every weekend, I would always be at the church. And then the summer between my 11th and 12th grade in high school, the last 2 years of high school here in the States, my dad sent me to music camp. To this day, I'm convinced Danny sent me to music camp to keep me away from the church because he never spent money on me. But so he sent me to music camp. And for the first time in my life, I became friends with people who, knowingly to me, were gay and or bisexual. And I adore these people, but that's a huge sin in my church. So I write to my mom and I say, what do I do? And she says, they're sinful, they're evil, you have two choices. You can convert them or just stay away from them. And for the first time, I didn't agree and it didn't make sense to me. And you have to understand, we were literally taught that if you ever questioned anything, it's Satan trying to win you back, right? Trying to win you back from God. So as soon as you question, you automatically doubt it and you take a cold shower and you beat yourself or you pray. Like always in the church, they're taught if you listen to any of these other sources outside or believe anything other than divine principle, that's Satan. And you just have to not let it in. So for the first time, I start to question because I'd never questioned before. And then I come home from camp. And again, I have been best friends with Reverend Moon's daughter, with Injun, and also friends with some other blessed children who were born to the couples who are blessed in this huge arranged marriages, whose mass marriages. And one of my friends who was a blessed child was seduced by our Sunday school teacher. This is a soap opera. Seduced by our Sunday school teacher and having an affair with him. And in order to keep everyone from noticing her, and because she was jealous of my friendship with him, she spread all these rumors about me. She said I wanted to sleep with all the brothers. And Reverend Moon heard the rumors, believed the rumors, and made a decree that only blessed children could play with the true children. So he basically banished me. I like to say the Messiah banished me. Like made the decree so I could not go near his children anymore. And so I'm questioning for the first time, and the Messiah has just banished me. And I go back to my last year of school, very torn and very confused. And I think, okay, I joined as a 10-year-old, so I did not make an adult decision to join. So I'm going to pull back a little bit now, and I'm going to come back and make an adult decision as a 17-year-old to never question again and give my whole life to the church. And I start to pull away and hang out more in my school and make new friends and get involved with people there and find more unconditional love. And my best friend is actually coming over a little later tonight, my friend from then, right? Love and friendship and a world that I had not experienced before. And then I started experimenting with a few other things, including alcohol. And I was at a party and I got drunk and I kissed a boy, and then I had a boyfriend, and that's the other big sin. And then everything just went from there.
Well, just to sort of backtrack a little bit, you mentioned about the mass weddings, which most people will be familiar with that. The Moonies are famous for having these gigantic weddings. Am I right in saying you went to your mother's marriage, remarriage, or second marriage in Madison Square Garden with thousands of others being married?
Yes, the line I used that I forgot to give you is the best seats I ever had at Madison Square Garden, which is a huge arena in New York City, were at my mother's wedding. Because I was on the floor, I had floor seats to watch my mother get married with 2,075 other couples. Over 5,000 people, right? 4,000 people. And on the other hand, the best cocaine I ever had was from my father's friend, the judge. And someone recently said, "You don't really mean a judge?" I'm like, "No, really. He was a judge of a small town in New Jersey." So, yes, I watched my mom. It was July 1st, 1982. It was the summer between my first and second year university here. I had already started to as someone said recently, you're just one of those drifters, right? I never actually left. I just drifted away, but I was already really pulled away by the time I went to watch my mom get married. But yeah, she got married in Madison Square Garden. Absolutely. And
was she put together with somebody she'd never met before? Because isn't that the way it goes?
That is the way it goes. So in general, the way it goes is Moon has a room full of members, all the brothers on one side, all the sisters on another side, and he points from person to person, you, because he can see your spiritual being and he knows what's best for you. And just the other day, someone asked me, can you say no? I'm like, you can say no, but if the Messiah picked your spouse, would you say no? Right? No. So with my mom, what apparently happened is she stood up and he said she has two children who have original sin, who will still be sinful, who is willing to take this on. And this nice man raised his hand and became my mom's betrothed. And they got matched probably 1979 and then spent no time together until they got married in 1982, and then spent no time together until they lived together later in the 80s, which is how they do it in the church. You get married to someone and spend no time, and you marry someone and spend no time, and then you eventually start a family.
Wow, it's fascinating.
It is, isn't it?
Well, you found yourself pulling away from the church, and even though you thought you might return and recommit, you stayed away and you never rejoined. So what was it like leaving a group that taught that it was the only truth?
It's not easy. So when I left, I still knew he was the Messiah. I just didn't want to do it. And so I was truly tormented because, I mean, you're taught in the divine principle how humankind for centuries, for eons, has let God down, has disappointed God, has hurt God's heart. And here I was, one more person, not strong enough, not true enough, not willing to sacrifice my life for God. And so I have a very dear friend who I met at my beginning of university, and I would spend hours going, but what if it's right? But what if it's right? But what if it's right? And he finally said to me, what if it is right, but it's not right for you? And for some reason, that was what I clung to. And so I clung to it, and I just, as I said, slowly stopped going, but I almost jumped off the bridge at Cornell, which, yes, everybody almost jumps off the bridge at Cornell, but I really almost jumped off the bridge in Cornell because it would be better to die than to choose. Right? I'd rather have a physical death than a spiritual death. My sophomore year, I became very anorexic, stopped eating, might as well die that way. My junior year, I did a hell of a lot of cocaine, hence the judge with the amazing cocaine. And then my senior year, my fourth year at university, I just started embarking on more destructive relationships. I believe, in retrospect, just all to punish myself for how shameful and sinful and awful I was for deserting the Messiah. So yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. And it is so carved in your brain. I will tell you, I left in the 80s and there was no community that I knew of. And as you know, there's now a huge community of farmers and people who've left. And in reconnecting with people, right, and especially those of us who are called second gens or third gens, right, second generations, people born and or raised, I've learned that it affects your brain in such specific ways when you, I was once asked if I was brainwashed, and I was like, I wasn't brainwashed. I didn't have a brain to be washed. I was pickled. I was pickled and carved because I was so young when we joined, and it affects your brain in such specific, unique ways that I can meet a second gen from another cult in another country and know him better than I know people I've known for decades because we're so similar on side. But when I left, I was highly functional on the outside, and I did not realize for a really long time how broken and damaged I was from everything that had happened. I was just kind of pushed it all down to never deal with it for a very long time.
Okay, let's talk about the book To the Moon and Back, A Childhood Under the Influence. This project can really be traced back to an Al-Anon meeting that you attended, correct?
Yes. So as my path of self-destruction continued, after university, I got engaged to a man who drank a hell of a lot and was really mean when he drank. And luckily for me, someone pointed me to Al-Anon, which is, if AA is the 12-step program for people who have their arms around the alcohol, Al-Anon is the 12-step program for people who have their arms around the alcoholic. So pointed me to this meeting, and I love to say, I walk in thinking, tell me if he's an alcoholic. There's no way I would ever be with an alcoholic because I'm way too smart and functional for that. Only to realize that, like, wow, there's a lot that's broken inside. And as my brother likes to say, my brother also got into recovery around then. He likes to see you sit in a room with like 100-something people in the room, and they all have these really hard lives, right? They're in this 12-step program. And you tell your story, and their jaws all drop. You go, oh, okay, I guess it's, I mean, I knew it was weird, but I guess it's like a lot. I didn't know it was a lot. And it was in those meetings that people kept saying, you should write a book, you should write a book. Oh my God, your story, you should write a book. Your story is unbelievable, you should write a book. And so that was where the book first came from, was everybody saying, you have a story. And then, as you said earlier, I have a leadership consultant firm, and I'm an executive coach. And so I was determined to write a book that was a message of hope. When I first started, it literally was half memoir, half self-help. Like, here's what happened to me. Here's how it messed me up. I got better. You can too. And that was not publishable for a lot of reasons, but I was determined to use my story to help other people find their own way out of their own pain and suffering.
Lisa, what do you hope that people will get out of this book? Is it just aimed at people who have an interest in the Moonies?
So I like to say my story is really unique. Like, only Robbie, my older brother, has basically the same details. But fortunately, the themes are universal. And I mean, I was just speaking to an old friend today who said, I so identify with all these different things you have going on. So no, it's for people who grew up in the Moonies. It's for people who have an interest in the Moonies. It's people who grew up in other cults or other religious abuse situations. And it's for people from everywhere because, again, the themes are really universal. And I do have three main messages. One is that extremist situations exist. They're extremely prevalent. They're unbelievably intoxicating, and they're wildly dangerous, right? So as human animals, we crave certainty, purpose, and community. And a cult gives you absolute certainty, wonderful purpose, and a community like no other. There is nothing as intoxicating as knowing you have the truth with a capital T, even if it's not the truth. So that's the first message. They're there, they're intoxicating, we're all susceptible, and they're dangerous. The second is for anyone who feels hopeless or damaged beyond repair, there is hope and you're not damaged. My process of recovery and healing has been decades long. And I literally, when the book came out in 2018, when it was published in 2018, through this process, I realized I still thought I was damaged and broken. I have damage. I have scars. Stuff happened. And I have scars and, trauma reactions. That's true, but I'm not damaged. And that's such a big difference. And that's a message I want people to know there is hope. There is hope even when you feel hopeless. And the third, from my own experience, from my work as a coach, I've come to determine that as a species, we're all way too hard on ourselves, or at least most of us. Self-critical, self-lambasting, self-judging. We treat ourselves way worse than we would treat anybody else. And we just need a huge dose of self-love. I'm putting my hands on my heart if no one can see. Self-love and self-compassion, right? I was talking to my friend about that today. It comes up and you're like, oh, there it is. Wow, that's crazy. Okay. Big breath. Okay, honey, you'll be okay, right? And just to love ourselves so that we heal from all the stuff from everything. Those are my messages.
What about the Unification Church now? Reverend Moon died in 2012. What has happened to the church since then?
So since Moon died in 2012, it's kind of another soap opera. So the church, as I understand it, right, because I get somewhat close but stay a little bit away, but it's split into three factions. The first faction, I believe they changed the name. It used to be the Family Federation of Peace, is run by Hak Jahan, Moon's wife at the time of his death, and the mother of, I think it got to be 13 kids, and maybe more, but I lost track after I left. So that's one faction. A second faction is run by Preston Moon, Youngden Moon, I think it's Moon's oldest living son with Hak Jahan, and I forget what that name is, but that faction is run over there, and I was told recently that he's been invited to be involved at the UN, which is just terrifying to those of us who know what the church is about, right? And then the third faction is run by Sean Moon, and I'm trying to think of what his Korean name is. They all got American names along the way. And that, it's well known here in the States. It's called Sanctuary Church. They are a church. They're in not so far from here in part of Pennsylvania. And they're famous because they worship the rod of iron, which he sees as rifles and armaments. And so they had a marriage ceremony, and they all brought AR-15s to the marriage ceremony, and they teach everyone to fight as God's army. And
yes, that was on the news.
I believe he's the King of Kings, and they are armed. And if he said shoot, they would shoot in a heartbeat. Like, I guarantee you, if he said those people are evil, kill them, they would kill them. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Lisa, that was such an amazing story, and thank you so much for coming on to talk about your life in and out of the Unification Church. I will leave links to your book and social media in the description below, and hopefully we can catch up with you again sometime in the future.
I hope so. It's been so great talking to you, finally. Thank you for the opportunity, and I definitely hope to stay connected. And when and if I'm ever allowed in your country again, to actually possibly see you in person.
That would be wonderful.